Hi, David.
Hi.
Appreciate you finding the time. We'll record a conversation and edit it down later to make us both concise and mostly me, because I tend to prattle on.
Well, I know what you guys can do is make me say black is green and 1 and 1 make 10 and all that, but that's the medium.
That's a good idea. We're going to do that. We've never met before. I've been covering the media for 10 years now, and though we've never met, your name has come up.
Uh-oh.
When I first started this Canadaland project, the first bunch of stories we did were about CBC hosts Rex Murphy taking money from the petroleum producers, giving paid speeches. Peter Mansbridge was doing that. It was all kind of happening pretty secretly. And then, Canadian Geographic magazine, this supposedly environmental magazine, was getting money from the petroleum producers, and they were putting up pro-oil sands curriculum into schoolrooms. So that's how we sort of got on the map for a lot of people. And then people started telling me, you got to look into this Suzuki character. A fellow named Ezra Levant. He said, that's got to be your next target. And he started sending me all these files and telling me you were up to no good. And I don't care. I'll do an expose on anyone if the facts are there. It was no good. He had me trying to track you down that you were in cahoots with an oil company. Turns out, you remember this?
Jesus Christ. Yeah. It was a co-ownership of property on an island, and I didn't know who else had bought into it. But apparently, I only know from what other people have said, one of the owners used to run a company that collected old oil or something. I don't know. It wasn't an oil salesman, but it was long gone. He was retired. And
listen, I wasted a lot of my time trying to figure this out. It was a defunct company that used to deliver like oil to people's homes, and they hadn't done it in decades. And then you own some land that's somehow associated. On paper, it says, Suzuki's connected to an oil company. It could have been a big expose. There was nothing there.
That's Ezra's style, is to find this fact and this fact, join them together to make it seem like something pernicious. But that's a style. That's the way it goes.
He's not the only one. They've been coming after you. I've been reading up on the various controversies, but the controversies, I can't find anything that you did, basically. But I could find a lot of people over the years trying to paint you as a fraud, or that you've got some secret, or that you're secretly funded by this one, and none of it ultimately stands the test of time or of scrutiny. Why do you think they keep coming at you?
Well, obviously, it's they don't want to deal with the issue being raised. I mean, you see it with Al Gore, for example, who has had a huge impact after he was left office as a climate advocate. And, one of the first attacks was Al Gore owns a big house in Tennessee that takes a lot of energy. But these kinds of attacks are meant to keep us from dealing with the issue being raised. If you undercut the authenticity or the hypocrisy of someone, then that seems to be a reason to ignore whatever they're saying. It's a very effective tactic, I think.
Shoot the messenger.
Yep.
It's not just, Ezra Levant's got a reputation that's well known, and the courts have weighed in on his disregard for the facts. But, it's more mainstream voices as well. You used to have a column for the Globe and Mail, but then they kind of turned on you.
I don't know.
Well, so here's a Globe and Mail column from 2018. Mr. Suzuki is known by most as a twinkly-eyed old sage with a harmless message about living in tune with nature. But his messages are not benign. He doesn't simply oppose fossil fuels or the capitalist system. He's a menace to scientific inquiry.
Oh, okay. Because until you got the menace to scientific inquiry, he's right. He's absolutely right. I am a threat to the current status quo. And, at the heart of a great deal of our problems is capitalism itself. He's right on that.
I got to correct you. It was actually Margaret Wente who wrote that in Global.
Oh, Margaret. Yeah, I've talked to Margaret in the past. What is she doing now? Is she retired?
I think that's it for her. And when I say that Margaret Wente wrote that, as far as I know, she wrote that, but it's possible that that's something that somebody else wrote.
Well, I got fired. I used to write a weekly column for the Globe and Mail. I
Hmm.
got fired because they said, well, he said to me in private, you're supposed to be a science columnist, and you're too heavily environmental. I don't know why that wasn't science wasn't related to that. But I ended up attacking many of the people like Corcoran on the financial pages, and I guess that just wasn't acceptable, and they dumped me.
According to McLean's feature, you were dumped for being too preachy.
Ah, okay.
Going through your old broadcasts, the message you had, decade after decade, was pretty consistent.
What bothers me is that in a world that's becoming extremely complex, in which the environment in many ways is being ravished very rapidly, rather than trying to recover our good environment, our clean air and clean water and so on, we may begin to say, well, let's adapt man to the noxious gases in the air and the dirty water. Let's start tampering with his basic makeup.
I was taken aback, this idea that perhaps you had gotten angrier over the years or something, but the warning that you were sounding is the same warning for a very long time.
Yeah, recently over the summer, Ideas rebroadcast some of the shows from previous shows I've done. Like I did a series in 1989 for radio called It's a Matter of Survival. And they broadcast three of them. And what was chilling was one that it could be broadcast today. It was every bit as relevant. In other words, we haven't done a goddamn thing about the issues being raised. But what was even more chilling was an interview with the hottest politician elected in the 1988 election. Brian Mulroney was reelected. He appointed Lucien Bouchard, who is this hot new politician, to be the Minister of the Environment. And that was to show that Mulroney placed environment as a high priority. So you hear in the interview, I say to him, Mr. Minister, now this is a few months after Bouchard had taken the job. What have you found is the most important issue confronting Canadians today? This is 1989. And he immediately said, global warming. That was impressive. So I said, how serious is it? And these are his exact words.
We are dealing with the survival of the species.
It threatens the survival of our species.
It is a question of great, great emergency. We must stop seeing the burning of fossil fuels as the only way to live in Canada.
1989. The politicians had heard it. He understood what the issue was. And the tragedy is that we didn't take that seriously. Bouchard himself, obviously, he felt the separation of Quebec was more important than the survival of our species. Mr. Mulroney had been given a blueprint for what we have to do in 1988 when he chaired one of the first international meetings on the atmosphere. This is in Toronto. And he opened the meeting in 1988. He was newly elected. The primary speech was delivered by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway. Stephen Lewis chaired the sessions for 3 days. James Hansen, the man who, climatologist, who had earlier said in Congress in the United States, he was 99% sure that the warming they were experiencing that year was due to man-made global warming. So it was all there. There were government representatives from over 40 countries in the world. 300 people attended. At the end of the conference, the press release said, human beings are performing an uncontrolled, unprecedented experiment with the only home we have. And the threat to human survival was second only to an all-out nuclear war. That's what the press release said at the end of the meeting. And they called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. If we had taken that warning seriously and done it, looked to a 20% reduction in 15 years, we would not have the crisis we have today.
If. And what's maddening about going through your archives is that we knew and you knew. And
Yeah.
here's the other way that your name comes up around here in this small news company. My colleagues say we should do more climate stories. We should do more climate coverage. And I say, well, why do we do climate coverage? And they say, well, we have to tell people. And I say, well, who doesn't know? Who doesn't know? Because they said, no, it's not represented enough. We have to get the message out. And then I look at the archives, and there are, 4 or 5 decades? But not for that entire period, but for most of it, David Suzuki was not on a podcast. He was on the national broadcaster, getting serious ratings. You know, like some of your stuff has like 1.8 million. Like the theory of why climate coverage is so that we could tell people that this is real and we could put the lie to the propaganda so that then they could go and make better decisions as citizens, as consumers, et cetera, so that then we can avoid the worst outcomes. And
Right.
your career, in a sense, is proof that is a completely ineffective strategy for combating climate change. I mean, do you walk around just wanting to punch people in the neck for like you've been screaming at us about this for a long time?
Well, that's interesting because I was going out for dinner with my daughter, who's now the executive director of the David Suzuki Foundation. And this is in our neighborhood. A guy jumped out and he looked friendly. He was about 40 to 50 years old. And he said, Suzuki. I went, yeah. And he says, I'd like to punch you in the face. So I was really taken aback. I wanted to ask him, well, why? You know, why would a young guy like you want to punch an old man like me? But my daughter kind of dragged me off. But that is a tragedy, is that the message is a hard message.
What was he mad at you about?
I have no idea. I've had death threats and all. We had a bullet fired through our window. Back then, we were fighting the forest industry. Then it was very heated in British Columbia. But the idea, rather than countering and saying, Suzuki, you're full of shit and this is why, which is what I would like to indulge in, it's you really piss me off and I want to punch you out. And so the frightening thing about today is that there's no opportunity for dialogue. You know, Ezra has his agenda, and everything that is said will feed into his narrative, and there's no exchange. I went up to a guy manning a table a few months ago that said, recall Eby. This is the newly appointed Premier of British Columbia. 3 weeks after he was appointed, there's a table saying recall Eby. So I went up and said, hey, why? You know, what's going on here? Very friendly. He said, you know, well, it's all about freedom, you know, the vaccination demands. Mm-hmm. And so it's all the truckers stuff, you know. So I said, you know, you guys talk about freedom, but when I breathe the air coming out of your nose and you're breathing the air coming out of my nose, don't you think there's a responsibility there? You know, how can you talk about freedom without responsibility? And the response was, Suzuki, you used to be a good guy. Why are you such an asshole now? So again, the whole thing is you're an asshole. I don't have to deal with the issue that you're dealing with. And that's what is really frightening to me today is, you know, with Trump and all of the crap that he's promulgating and people repeating it over and over again, there's no opportunity for conversation. And I think we're in a really, you know, Rex Murphy, for Christ's sake, guy I long admired for his outspokenness, but for people like this to deny, as you say, look, what's the issue about climate change? You can't deny it. It's there. But guys like that are. We have a different agenda.
I hear you, and I hear you decrying these people who don't want to talk about the facts. They just want to talk in personal and ad hominem attacks. But I'm asking you, you've been trying to have a conversation, speaking with facts and reason for a long time, and some people don't want to hear it. Do you ever just feel like you've given people too much credit? You've been telling us the truth for a long time, And we'll watch the pretty pictures and we like looking at the animals, but nothing's changed.
No, it's I have to do the only thing that I personally think I'm capable of doing. I don't have the conceit that I'm the one that's going to make the difference. I just have to do the tiny bit, and I've been given this huge opportunity in a way, a platform for my ideas on the nature of things and a number of radio series I've done. I just have to do the best I can, and I have no illusion that I'm so important. I've got to be the one.
I'm the generation that was brought up being educated. I can never say I didn't know, because from the time I was a child, I was taught about global warming and climate change. And I remember the Earth Day special on network TV. It's never been seriously considered to me that there's another narrative that maybe it's not. It's obviously real. It's always been that way. And yet I now have a sense of frustration and futility because I've been hearing, oh, the time is running out, we got to do something. And then at a certain point, like, time has kind of run out, or the time to really set it back we squandered it. And it made me think about the message itself and where maybe the message went wrong. George Monbiot wrote that the big polluter's masterstroke was to blame the climate crisis on you and me.
Uh-huh.
And I've been thinking a lot about how what I've been told since I was a kid was a combination of, businesses need to wake up to this, governments need to wake up to this. But any kid hearing that the world is in such dire straits, what can I do? And they had, you can do something. Don't worry. You can be a part of the solution. And everything from buying these green products to, recycling and trying to limit. I wonder if that wasn't a huge misdirection. And creates all this personal anxiety and shame and stress, and we're judging each other, and people come after you. Oh, he took a plane to get here. This is missing the point entirely, and it was doing an incredible favor, argues Monbiot, to the actual corporations, because they're happy to sell us those products, and they're happy to say, yeah, this is your fault, consumer. Whereas really this was a problem that only could have been solved at the policy level.
The thing I see now as a real problem is that we're all caught up in systems. The roots to me lie in the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago. Once, before we became farmers, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. That's for 95% of human existence. That's what we did. We carried everything we owned on our backs. We followed animals over their migrations. We had to hunt for plants during the seasons. And when you live in that state, you know goddamn well you're a part of a much bigger system, that nature is the source of your very survival. And that understanding, what we call an ecocentric perspective, that we are one strand in a complex web of relationships with all other species of animals and plants, with air, water, soil, and sunlight. That's the way people have lived since the beginning of our species. And today, it's still the indigenous people that look at the world in an ecocentric way. They are a threat to the establishment because it's a very different way of living with our surroundings. But once you had agriculture, you could stay in place. You didn't have to wander around. You could now build a permanent structure, houses, which became villages and towns. But as our populations grew, we had to have rules to interact with each other, to have transactions with each other. And so you get religions and economies and laws and all of that. They are all built on a very different relationship with nature. They're built, our economic, political, legal systems are built on what we call an anthropocentric way of seeing the world. It's more of a pyramid now, not a web, but a pyramid where we're at the top and everything below is for us. The earth is no longer our mother. It's a huge opportunity. Another species is no longer our biological kin. They're a resource. Mm-hmm. A river is no longer the circulatory system of the land. It's energy and irrigation. A forest is no longer a community of organisms. It's timber and pulp. So we're imposing humans and the way we see the world in that way. And I go through now looking at our legal, our economic, and our political systems. Nature and what nature does to keep the planet habitable is left out. And so they are inevitably destructive. And so that's threatening. You're goddamn right it's threatening. This is what Ezra has tapped into. Don't listen to these guys because it is very, very threatening. Let me just give you the simplest example of why the system's crazy. First of all, economics is predicated now on the creed of cancer, growth, endless growth. And the result is going to be the same, whether it's economic or a biological system. Anyway, Mark Carney, who's I think's got a lot of economic cred, wrote a book called Values. And in the first chapter, he tells us that one of the problems is Amazon, the company Jeff Bezos started, is valued by the economy in the tens of billions of dollars. Amazon, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no value in the economy until someone logs it, mines it, dams it, floods it, converts it into a city or a farm to grow soybeans. So only when humans impose or exploit something does it have any economic value.
Preach on. I'm sold. I'm sold, man. But let's take this to the actual logical conclusion, because before we would assign things like, oh, this is radical talk or this is you got to be a hippie. But like at a certain point, facts are facts and reality wins over, right? It's just true that this man-made system of capitalism, of the economy, does not have within its scope a value for. Just as you say, the Amazon company will value it higher than anything else. The Amazon rainforest, zero value. The nation state, which is a man-made construct where we draw invisible lines, is an ill-equipped device for dealing with this problem because this problem doesn't respect our imaginary lines. So it doesn't matter to a certain extent. And what do they say in the tar sands? Well, it doesn't matter if we stop digging this stuff up because some other country is going to go and just do the same thing. There's a point there. It's true. So all of the systems we have for solving problems, whether it's through capitalism and companies or whether it's through nation states making laws unto themselves, are ill-equipped to deal with this problem. So where does that actually take us? I think you got kind of close to it in something you said, but then you were kind of forced to walk back, which is, if you're making the nature of things decade after decade to inform people so we can make better decisions as voters, well, we don't even have on the menu a political party in Canada that is willing to stop digging up the fossil fuels from the oil sands. It's not even a choice that the voter has from a federal party in Canada. So what happens when these systems and the system of governance just can't seem to figure out a way of breaking out of the system and figuring something new out? You said pretty soon people are going to start blowing up pipelines. And your adversaries took that in a very cynical way, which is not what you were saying, as if you were somehow excusing or inciting people to blow up pipelines. But what you're saying was 100% true. And it's not even going to be radicals or eco-terrorists. If enough people are displaced by climate catastrophe from their homes, if enough people can't eat, they're going to get violent. And it's already happening. And there's sort of, I don't know if we've lost our chance to actually set back the clock in terms of carbon in the atmosphere, but we still maybe have a chance of preserving order in the world. But I fear we're not going to take that either. It seems like your message had moved on to saying we're going to have to get imaginative about creating a new system that does respect nature. Nature's laws are going to trump our invisible borders and our corporate economy. They're going to assert themselves. And we kind of have a little window here where maybe we could figure out a different way of dealing with it. Do you regret apologizing for that? Because I know what you meant and I thought you were right.
Apologize, but I never said, go and blow up pipelines. I just said if we continue to ignore the problems the way that we are now, people are going to be desperate enough to start blowing up pipelines.
You were
That's
right.
all I'm saying. Why should I regret that? What I regret is failing to realize the way the media work. The media are very selective. Their job is to sell newspapers or get a bigger audience or whatever. And truth and setting context, they're not the highest priority. So my naivete in saying that, resulted in an opportunity for those that don't want to confront the the actual reality of what I'm saying. The problem, though, is we're all caught up in the system. I had the CEO of one of the largest companies in the tar sands come down, and he called and said, "Could I talk to you?" I said, "Of course. I don't want to fight. Come and talk to me." Came down the next day. And, I thanked him and said how honored I was and all that stuff. And then I said, "Look, before you come into my office, I'd like you to do me a big favor. Leave your identity as a CEO of an oil company outside. I want to meet you as one human being with another, because I don't see the point of talking about carbon taxes or pipelines or any of that until you and I agree. If we don't agree on some common things, then we're arguing all over the place and we're not talking to each other." So he was a good man. This isn't what he expected, but he was a good man. So reluctantly, he came into my office and I said, "Look, thank you for coming in. I know this isn't what you wanted, but let me tell you what I'm thinking." I said, "You and I, we're animals." And I could see right away, people don't like to be called an animal, right? We are animals. And I said, "Mr. CEO, as an animal, what do you think is the most important thing you and I need?" And instead of giving me the answer right away, he goes, and I could see he's thinking a job, money, a house. I said, "Mr. CEO, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air, you're sick." So humans don't make clean air. Nature cleans the air and creates the air for us to breathe. And so it's a sacred gift from nature. It seems to me we have a responsibility to pass the air that is going to go into our bodies on to future generations in a pure state.
How do you like that?
Well, he was listening. Then I went through water, right? I said,
Yeah.
You and I are 70% water. We're basically a big blob of water with enough thickener added. We don't dribble away on the floor. I said, but we leak water. It comes out of our eyes and our mouth and our nose and our crotch. And I said, if you don't have water for 4 to 6 days, you're dead. Polluted water, you're sick. Water is cleansed by nature. We don't create clean water. It's a sacred gift. And then I went through food. We last a lot longer, but 4 to 6 weeks without food, we die. Most of it is grown in the soil. All of the energy in our body comes from photosynthesis. And I said, other things, corporations, companies, governments, political parties, these things, the market, currency, these are not forces of nature. We invented them. I said, you can't change the laws of nature that determine we need air, water, soil, and so on. But we can sure as hell change the systems we've created to fit with the reality of nature. I said, Mr. CEO, if you shake hands with me and agree with what I just said, I'll do everything I can to help you and your company.
And he shook your hand, and then he resigned as a CEO, and now he's a monk. And living in harmony.
But you're saying exactly that the choice he had, he couldn't shake hands with me because he was a good man. He understood what I was saying. But in the game he's in, if he went back to his shareholders and said, well, I had a talk with Suzuki and he's right. Our company, an oil company, whatever we do, we can't mess with the air, water, or soil. He wouldn't be praised as this great visionary leader of he'd be fired in a second. That's not his job. His job is to make money. The faster and the more you make, the better. That's why the oil companies, which have known since 1959, Exxon's own scientist, John Black, by the 1970s, were saying, that's right, we're warming the planet. Despite knowing that, the primary drive of the oil industry is make money. The more, the faster, the better.
And
So
I'm sure
look
they
at,
were. I'm sure those were all good guys as well. And I think it only goes so far to say that this is evil, rapacious, greedy companies. They are, but
it's the
they
system.
exist in a system. We exist in a system, and we're gonna
Exactly.
burn our fuel as well today. Everyone exists in the system, and the only way it would stop is if they're forced to stop. And if our governments can't force them to stop, there is a choice that people have. When it comes down to it, people can rise up. That can happen. Pipelines can be. Are we going to go there? What
I
do you
want
think?
people, no, I want people to think what's just happened in Ontario. Doug Ford made this incredible decision, and what resulted was a massive kickback or response from the public. The Greenbelt mattered to people in Ontario, and they forced him
Yeah.
to live by his own words. When he
And it began with journalism. It began with journalism, and then it went to the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner, and then that went to the people, and the people made the whole thing worked. I was astonished. That the whole thing worked.
it's fantastic. But you know what we saw in the recent suit in the United States with Fox News is, the media are driven by their own agendas, and facts and truth are not the driving force of their agenda. And so when you say journalism, yes, but look at the sorry state of journalism today. It's independent journalism. The CBC I've always treasured because the CBC is paid for by the Canadian public. And that has made public broadcasting so important. Because now your constituency, the people that fund you, are the ones on whom, that you have the obligation to. And we desperately need those avenues. Even the CBC, we have now advertising on CBC television. That affects journalism.
Well, we're here doing radio. I'm a former CBCer and now running this podcast company. And we've been for years now saying when the CBC moved to podcasting, they started airing ads, and there wasn't much of a commotion about that. But I thought that was an integral difference from what the CBC that I worked for, where we didn't have to worry about that sort of thing.
You're absolutely right. But we're all caught up in the system. So even those, well-meaning and so on, it's like environmentalists. We're caught up. If we say you got to shut down the tar sands, but wait, it won't destroy the economy and we can create jobs over. We're all justifying these things by saying it won't be destructive of the economy. But the economy is driving us into that. We need a different kind of economics.
Let me finish with you by sharing with you the awful truth. I think everybody knows. Even the people denying climate change know that it's real. You'd really have to be willing yourself into stupidity and ignorance. Maybe some people got there, but I think even those who are out there propagandizing, they kind of know that it's real. I mean, you go out in Toronto and it smells like a campfire. It's at our door, and I think the awful truth is that Canadians are telling themselves, "Well, this is happening." But if it's got to happen, we're in the best possible place. And I don't mind if it's a little bit warmer here. We could farm more of the land. September's nice and sunny. And I'm not on an ocean. I don't have to worry about my Toronto home being lakefront property. Maybe this is even going to be good for us. And the Canadian government has funded research into the economic benefits of climate change. And I think that we're still thinking in terms of a system where it's economically beneficial, so we're still locked into that system, and we're still really believing in the nation state, that even in a world where people are dying to get out of their countries, and we have all the water, that somehow our nation state is going to be protectable. I think we're still clinging to these notions.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a certain strain, even in people who will say all the right things about fighting climate change, where we're getting used to the idea and we don't hate it.
Yeah. We've spent so much of our time as a foundation trying to inform people and, make climate change or global warming real in their lives. We don't have to do that anymore. I mean, if people aren't willing to see with their own eyes and knows what the hell's going on, all of the trumpeting by organizations like ours aren't going to make any difference. So now really we're focusing on local communities and saying, look, we're already over the edge of the cliff, and we've got to try to catch on to a ledge somewhere, and that's in the local community. The problem is that one of the glorious things about humankind is the diversity of human cultures and language and socioeconomic positions, and all of that stuff makes us a very diverse organism. But the one time when we can act together as a single species is when aliens from another galaxy arrive here and start invading the planet, killing millions of human beings, doesn't matter what color or culture they come from, and every footstep they take crushes an acre of rainforest every second. Every time they fart, they spew out toxic poisons. They're scooping up everything from the oceans. We would act as one species and say, this is the threat. We've got to all come together and fight this off. Well, the alien is here. It's not from outer space, and it's not a person or a company or a nation. It's a mindset. It's a mindset that has been globalized to say, we are in charge, we are the dominators, and we're so great. If we're not going to save this planet, we're going to invent a rocket and go and inhabit Mars, convert Mars into an Earth. I mean, this is the madness that is here now. But the mindset is the challenge that we face. And that's the hardest thing to change. So thank you, Canadaland, for whatever you're doing. And we've all got to just hang in there and keep punching away.
I'm going to send you a comic book called Watchmen. I think you'll like it. David Suzuki, thank you very much.
Thank you.